We were never naive or hopelessly optimistic. We knew tragedy beyond our control could strike our family, no matter how safe we kept our daughter. But we didn't expect this. Anna Barrett, our little girl, died of leukemia at the age of 12. My wife, Jill, was a girly girl who loved her Disney princesses. I insisted that if we gave our daughter a royal-sounding name like she wanted, it should be something we could shorten so other kids wouldn't tease her. She agreed on Anastasia, shortening it to Anna, but in the end, she was a daddy's girl. I showed her the night before Christmas when she was 5, and slowly the pinks and pastels in her room faded in favor of darker colors. We didn't watch slasher movies together or anything like that, but she was still quite the horror head by the time she was 9. Jill didn't begrudge me this, but just shook her head in amusement. There are times, like when Anna got into an argument with a classmate and said she was going to death note him, Jill was a little less amused. We got the diagnosis early in Anna's 11th year, and we fought and fought and fought that hideous affliction with everything we could. But it was on Halloween, her last Halloween, that Anna's little body gave out. Halloween, which was second Christmas for the both of us. She was babbling in her drug-induced delirium, completely unaware it was her favorite night. We steeled ourselves when she first started to babble.
"No, Daddy. Don't go tonight. They're so strong tonight."
It only got worse from there, and she raved about bugs in the walls, the moon watching us, something about a rope, a woman who couldn't hear us. And when her vitals started to spike, the staff forced us out. My wife, stronger than she ever gave herself credit for, had been watching our little girl waste away for months without cracking. She let it all out that night. When the doctors told us Anna didn't have much time left, Jill approached her sickbed with resignation. Anna looked so small and frail, and it was hard to tell where our little girl ended and the hospital equipment began. She opened her blue eyes, which still sparkled beneath her bare, gleaming scalp. She barely seemed aware we were actually in the room with her, but knew it was time to say her goodbyes. And she passed an instant later. The next Halloween found me heading home from a business trip. I was grateful for every stressful minute of it because it helped me forget it used to be our favorite holiday. It should have been over with the day before, but incalcitrant clients held up the proceedings before they were finally happy. I was pissed heading home, because the cemetery would, of course, be closed. I was pissed that it wasn't quite far enough away for the company to spring for a plane ticket, forcing me to drive home. I was 3 hours away, my mind constantly on the bag in the back seat, and how it was meant for tonight. After Halloween, its contents were all but pointless. All in all, a stressful trip on a day I used to live for, but now only brought me pain, with no hope of solace when I got home. I felt my stomach growl and decided to get some junk to curb the pangs while I gassed up. How would things have gone if the clerk at the gas station hadn't been grousing to a customer about coming in his day off? "They may as well make it official and change the town's name to Voodoo," the clerk grumbled. The customer seemed disinterested at his uninvited gripe, so when they walked away, I stepped in and asked him what he meant. His overly simple explanation was that everything was worse in this town. When I asked, he elaborated. "I know it's really simple, but every disease or medical condition you can think of, this town has more of it. And they kill a proportionately higher number of people here, too. Accidents, too. Car accidents, people falling down stairs or out windows. We've had every government agency up here you can think of. Statisticians, doctors, scientists, and all they can come up with is that this town's super unlucky. Don't know who started it, but someone once said it was like everyone in this town has a voodoo doll that some witch or something just randomly jabs with a needle. That's where the nickname came from. The guy who was supposed to work has the flu, which you're 10 times more likely to die of if you live here. He went on to explain that those statisticians he mentioned had found perfectly concentric rings showed the high mortality rate grew even higher as you got closer to one house in particular. And my blood ran cold when he said where it was. And I asked if I heard him right. He confirmed. Yeah, on Kira Street. He gave me the address, and I was at the door almost instantly, ignoring the clerk's calls asking me if I still wanted my chips. My eyes were glued to my phone. After a few minutes of Googling, I was on my way. Soon enough, I arrived and pulled up something Anna had written for class last year that I had saved, something I thought was just cute and innocent at the time. It said, "The old abandoned house at night in October." This house was an ugly, rotten purple color with 2 trees in the front yard. Every window was boarded up, even the broken ones. When it's nighttime, people say that every nightmare comes from this old house. October leaves spread across the yard along with terror. The trees are bare. Nobody dares to go near that house. Nobody lives inside. I'm not saying someone died inside, but every owner of this house mysteriously disappeared. It lives in a town called Voodoo. Voodoo is located in Michigan. The house is on a corner of a street called Kira. Crows live inside of the house and many insects as well. If you go inside, you can smell a terrible stench. Dolls are located everywhere. The stairs are blocked by caution tape, the wallpaper was peeling off, there was a stone wall surrounding the house with a locked gate. The vines cover the stone wall and the chimney is broken. That was it. And there it was, an old, decaying house. Loving Halloween as I did, I'd done my share of research into its Irish origins. I'd picked up enough Gaelic to know Kira was derived from Kiar, meaning black. So the house on the black road was as Anna had described. The 2 bare trees filled with crows, the lopsided boards over all the windows. What little paint remained was indeed a sickening shade of purple in the darkness. I couldn't quite make out the chimney, but the thick stone wall surrounded the property was indeed consumed by snaking vines that curled themselves around the iron gate. The giant rusty padlock taunted me with the house's secrets it guarded. This is the age of the internet. This house could have easily been featured on any number of paranormal websites or the plethora of ghost hunting shows that glutted basic cable. She could have seen this house on any of those. Lord knows Anna watched them all. The rational part of my brain kept repeating this over and over, but my instincts won out as I pulled the bolt cutters out of my truck 15 minutes later, after running to the nearby Home Depot. While I hesitated inside my car, I realized I should have been seeing kids trick-or-treating. It was barely 9 p.m. I hadn't even seen any hint of a Halloween decoration. Not the glowing smile from a pulpy face, nor an orange, green, or purple light. It was the embodiment of what Anna and I would want to see in a haunted attraction. But reality inspired no whimsy, nor the enjoyable fear horror fiction blessed upon us. I had never seen a more terrifying building in my life, and somehow I was cutting the padlock before I allowed myself to even consider what I was doing. I left the chain on the sidewalk where I dropped it, and I didn't even care to close the gate behind me. A house like this would attract all sorts of legend-tripping kids on Halloween, and the place would probably do at least one patrol. I had a crazy image of shoving my phone in the face of the officer who found me, showing the old email where I had saved Anna's story, screaming that I needed answers. And sadly, that imagined breakdown seemed frighteningly plausible. The leaves crunched on the sidewalk beneath my feet. The wind whistled faintly, and most of the crows remained silent, only letting out the occasional croak of warning. They're just dumb animals, I told myself. The smartest of the dumb, but dumb nonetheless. The house seemed to swell in size rather than grow in my vision as I approached, reminding me of how animals made themselves look bigger to warn off predators. Still, it wasn't enough to stop me from kicking open the rickety front door and the crows screaming angrily at me. I ignored them, placing the items I had unthinkingly brought from the car by the entrance. It was as perfect on the inside as it was on the out, meaning a perfect mess of a spooky old house. A central staircase dominated the foyer, and the tiles below my feet were a black and white checkerboard. But that same spookiness saddened me when I saw the huge, elaborate chandelier directly above me. The intricate glass and metal had been swallowed by cobwebs, though I noticed the thick rope hanging from the finial at the bottom. The neck was flanked by broken skylights on either side, and more of those crows were peering down upon me. I could feel contempt in those keen avian eyes from my trespassing. I hoped they were the only tenants who might take issue with my presence. Like Anna had promised, the place stunk and roaches fled from the light of my phone flashlight. It was imbued with the scent of rot and shit and mold combined into some heretofore unknown miasma. The covered furniture scattered about would probably have to be tossed because they'd soaked up too much of this stench. But as I approached, I realized Anna was wrong about one thing: the dolls. They were certainly not located everywhere, or anywhere for that matter, but the research I did on my phone after rereading Anna's story didn't let their absence put me at ease. I had done a little reading while I had been hesitating to go inside, and got the backstory from a Ghosts of Michigan website. Adelaide Carroll had inherited a fortune at a young age, but put herself through nursing school because she wanted to help others in a hands-on way. She married a handsome store clerk, and when she became a pediatric nurse in 1981, everything seemed fine. It didn't last. Adelaide and her husband Alex couldn't conceive. The more desperate for a child she got, the more she dotted on her patience. She soon grew clingy, and her behavior was more and more out of bounds, such as calling the parents weeks after a patient's discharge to check on them, and even giving them inappropriately expensive gifts. Most understood she was making up for what she couldn't have, but were uncomfortable with their boys being given an expensive G.I. Joe vehicle. The girls all got dolls, but they were exquisite, handmade dolls Adelaide had crafted herself out of obviously expensive materials. The parents complained to the hospital board, whose reprimands to Adelaide were ignored, eventually forcing them to fire her. Alex packed up and left. Whether he saw her downward spiral coming or his leaving was the final straw that caused it, neither really mattered. Because the point is, it happened. She seems to age 10 years in one. Everyone could see she was in a bad way, but too many took her public mutterings when she rarely ventured out as a public offense. Eventually, a bunch of kids got together and gathered up as many of the dolls she had gifted to her patients as they could and tossed them over the stone walls of the huge house I was now wandering through. She stormed out, screaming at them and calling them ungrateful. She even slapped one of the boys. They fled, and an hour later, the police came and arrested Adelaide. An hour after that, she made bail. But the parents made it clear they were pressing charges now that she had given them the chance to punish her for the crime of being mentally ill and untreated. And a week after that, the police and paramedics came, announcing that evening that Adelaide Carroll had killed herself. There would be no service, no funeral, and she would be interred in a private place of her choosing. As for what came after, well, it is true that all of the house's inhabitants in the intervening years had suddenly gone. Only one had truly vanished. The family who lived there after her death, both parents and their young son, had disappeared without a trace. But the old bachelor who planned to make the house a fix-me-up to stave off the dreariness of retirement had simply left in the middle of the night and sent for his things afterward. The couple who got their house for a steal after a lot of rot had set in had done the same. While they were there one day and gone the next, the bachelor and the young couple were confirmed alive. So now, I had to think. Anna had written the drabble barely a week before her diagnosis. Adelaide Carroll's story was on a haunted Michigan website. There had to have been enough information online for Anna to write what she did. But as I ascended the foyer stairs, ignoring the fallen caution tape, my heart started to race. The grandfather clock at the top of the stairs was still ticking, its pendulum swinging, obviously to its home's slow death. It was a painting of the moon, but the man in the moon was more than pareidolia here. It was distinct, and it oozed with malevolence. I nearly felt myself hurtling through time, back 1 year to that awful final night. The night when Jill and I died with our daughter, but remained behind, walking corpses with little to say to the world or each other. I remembered what I thought was delirious babbling, and one of the first things she had said.
"She's watching from the moon."
Maybe some amateur ghost hunter had broken in and taken a picture of this clock and posted it somewhere. I had only scratched the surface with my internet search. But suddenly, I knew I had made a mistake just busting in here like I was some carefree college student looking for a ghost, and decided to leave. The walls started to skitter. Waves of faint clicks and rustling came from some indistinct corner of the house and started to get louder. It took me no time at all to realize it wasn't just getting closer. Whatever was making the sound was spreading, growing, even larger behind the walls. Bugs, spiders, the walls were filled with them, and the revulsion at the image of them spilling out of those rotting wooden confines that I made to leave.
"Forget the bugs, Daddy. There's something worse you need to see."
As soon as I remembered this, I got the distinct feeling I was being herded, that something wanted me gone. Tears welling in my eyes as I remembered the words from my daughter. I thought to be pointless babbling. I instead grabbed the railing and held firm. It had been easy to imagine Adelaide's crying, be it quiet sobs or hysterical weeping. When it started, echoing for real throughout the house, it sounded so much like I'd imagined that I wasn't afraid. I needed time to process the reality. When she actually spoke through her tears, terror finally set in.
"Didn't you want that toy? It was a big plane with a smaller plane attached to it. Didn't you like it? Why did you give it back?"
Looking down, there she was, in the foyer, slowly ascending the stairs. She looked like the sad beauty I had seen on the website, but the face was all I could recognize, for it topped a swirling mass, roughly man-height and looking like black ink in a fish tank. This was the real-life situation a lifetime of horror movies should have prepared me for, but my voice shook to the ascending apparition. I'm sorry, Adelaide. I'm sorry. I'll leave if that's what you want. Your parents may be ungrateful, but that doesn't mean you have to be." And the flashback to the night Anna died came even more quickly and clearly.
"She can't hear you. She could never hear you, and she doesn't know you. But she still hates you."
She was standing at the top of the stairs. Her eyes were on me, but she showed no sign of understanding me or hearing me. I tried opening any of the doors that looked down upon the first floor, but they wouldn't budge. Adelaide continued.
"You're too old for toys. Did you come from money? Like my husband?"
She was blocking my path. I couldn't get back down the stairs, and the doors wouldn't open, not as long as she wouldn't let them. And she seemed to make up her mind about me very quickly.
"You're just like Alex. You're all like Alex, the men and the women."
And the face contorted as she flew at me. Again, I remembered Anna's words.
"The chandelier. The rope on the chandelier will tell you everything."
I flung myself over the balustrade and grabbed onto the chandelier. I held onto it with all my might, and the second it bore my weight, I felt the neck of the ceiling fixture give, and the din started. All of the wall panels on the first floor fell away, one after the other, with a series of bangs that would have awakened the entire neighborhood if the Carroll house hadn't been so isolated. The chandelier swung and started to tear loose from the ceiling. But being lower than the second floor and losing height by the second, I now felt safe enough to jump. I launched myself away just as the ceiling caved in with a rumble and a sustained shattering crash. I was showered with debris as I hit the floor hard, and I felt vigorous stings that told me I'd gotten cut with quite a bit of broken glass. I'd bet that my body was saving the pain for the time when I could afford to feel it, which there was no guarantee of. I stood up, ran for the front door, but was surprised to find it, too, was little more than an immobile decoration. The crows outside screamed furiously both from the yard and from the lip of the gaping hole where the skylights once were. Even as I started to look for Adeline, I saw what had been behind the walls. Everywhere. Dolls. Jesus. They were built into display cases 4 high from floor to ceiling. The atmosphere calmed as I approached the closest one. Every wall on this floor was a false one, with a mechanism built into the chandelier to raise and lower them into the floor. Thousands of bugs squirmed across the walls, the moon spilling through the broken ceiling, revealing their presence as they covered everything behind the panels, without touching the dolls themselves.
Yes, take a doll. I made them just for you.
Perhaps a willingness to accept her gift was enough to calm whatever was left of Adelaide. So I hesitantly reached for the closest one, ignoring the gorge that rose in my stomach as my hands passed within inches of the wall of millions of legs. The doll was a standard little girl design, with golden curls and a blue dress, but the arms and legs were sculpted to be bent at odd angles, and the head had a sizable dent in it, with meticulously painted blood surrounding it. I pulled the string that I found in the back, and the wavering, girlish voice warbled from within.
I'm Daphne to straighten. When the evil of man drives me up a wall, all I do is hope, and they'll soon take a fall.
Next, a similar design, but emaciated and with something looking like a pouch affixed to the stomach, with the same voice trying a different character.
I'm Colleen Cancer. In my guts I know when things aren't well, and bad people end up in the bowels of hell.
Another one, the skin pale and eyes wide with terror.
I'm Nat Terrors. Dream a little dream of me, and you'll scream a big scream for me.
In any situation, I would have groaned at the punny names that would have been rejected for a garbage pail kid. I kept pulling strings.
I'm Philo Enza. The wicked waste every day, so it's for the best that they just waste away. I'm Burnus alive. No one's having fun unless it's hot as the sun.
Each of these dolls was a malady, a disease, or a premature and undeserved fate. Adeline had been using her dolls to lash out at and punish the town that had treated her so cruelly. Even with this realization, it took me a long moment to process the enormity of the implications that resided in the next doll. It looked like a skeletal, bald little boy. My heart sank at the familiarity, but somehow, my shaking hands managed to grasp and pull the string.
I'm leukemia. I start in your bones before I finally take you from your happy little homes.
And I suddenly remembered the road trip we had taken to Jill's aunt's house last year. We had taken the same interstate home I had just been on. We'd passed through this town just a week before Anna first started showing her symptoms. It could be a coincidence, but believing in coincidences would deny me the catharsis I felt when I smashed that doll, dashing its porcelain head onto that black and white tiled floor. I barely registered how hard I had to pull to remove the doll from its display. Adelaide screamed in rage, a keening roar that could only be produced when freed from the confines of flesh and blood. The house shook so violently that I fell over completely. The entire structure should have collapsed, had Adelaide allowed it. But she wasn't done with me. As the swirling mass glided to where I lay, tendrils resembling hands reached out, talon-like protrusions digging into the handles, promising what they were doing to me. One of the last things Anna had said came back to me. It was the thing that had nearly broken both Jill and I.
Don't forget me, Daddy.
I remembered what I had brought inside, what I had meant to save for the cemetery. The jack-o'-lantern I had stayed up late carving in my hotel room. I hadn't had time to do it anywhere else. I had brought it with me, wanted some part of my daughter to help me through this, because I had meticulously carved it as best as I could to look like her smiling face, lighting the candle I had bought, hoping it would bring me good luck. I had meant to leave it at her grave, but instead, I found myself grabbing it and swinging it to face Adelaide as she lunged. "Leave him alone!" I know I didn't imagine that. Those words spoken in the hospital 1 year ago now sounded out right in this room. Adelaide's screams were now only that of a mere mortal, a disturbed, lonely, abused, living woman. The shade flew back up the steps and into the grandfather clock, disappearing. Carol's house was silent. Even the ever-present squirming of the insects had faded. They had fled deeper into the house, the guarding of the dolls forgotten. I waited for another memory of last Halloween, where I now know Anna was speaking to me tonight, warning me about this place and how to make it out alive. Instead, something I had already recalled became clearer to me. "She's watching from the moon." I made my way around the debris, the bolt cutters in my hand again. I made my way up the stairs to the grandfather clock and smashed the face with the bolt cutters. Careful of the glass, I ripped away the entire front and wondered if anything would ever surprise me again. The last task the mortician and the lawyer had been tasked with. Inside was a desiccated corpse that was still recognizable as Adelaide. It was a white road map of creases and valleys. The empty eye sockets looked both hateful and sad. But what drew my attention more, even more so than the complete lack of mechanisms in the clock, were the vein threads growing from her body and digging into the back and floor of the clock. Her body had taken root, infesting the house, digging through the walls and into every single doll, allowing her to work her will through them. She was still as much a physical threat as she was a spiritual one. Then I looked back down at the front door, saw and remembered. Where I had been, what I had been doing. I had brought in the half-empty bottle of Jack that I had been nipping on while driving. I hadn't planned to drink myself into a stupor in this house, but I hadn't ruled it out. Everything that had happened between Jill and I during the past year had been me pushing away someone so desperate to take hold of the situation and set things right. The bottle, and countless others like it, had been my constant companion this past year. I ignored the corpse's slow movement, the distant, accusatory calling from Adelaide. I whispered for her to be at peace, and ripped the dried-out husk from the clock. The veins popped off like a succession of buttons in a ripped shirt. The corpse shattered into near dust, and I felt Adelaide's presence fade from her old home as soon as her agonized face vanished in white powder. I knew the last thing that had to be done. I tore off a piece of furniture cover, soaked it in Jack, stick it in the bottle, and light it with a candle from the jack-o'-lantern that bore my daughter's smiling face. A smile I knew to be approval as I placed the Molotov cocktail beneath the dry fabric of curtains. Somehow, I hadn't lost my phone, so I immediately dialed Jill, getting my heavy sleeper of a wife's voicemail. Jill? It's me. Look, I wanted to tell you I'm going to be home tonight. I know it's not always a guarantee these days, but it is now. I have a lot to apologize for. I can't do that over the phone. But what I can do is tell you I'm ready. I mean, to look at one of those places you told me about. When I get home, we'll start talking about which clinic is the right one. As soon as we decide which one, I'll check in immediately. I promise. I love you. I watched the house burn after that, never hearing one siren. If the townspeople were really in the know, then they wanted to be rid of this place even more than I did. I remembered the last thing Anna had said to us would have been her goodbye both then and now. You did good, Daddy. I love you. The invisible embrace of small arms around my shoulders stayed with me until the house collapsed. Happy Halloween, Anna. I come from the outskirts of a small town in the south of England. It's a quaint town, if I'm honest, that doesn't really have much to put it on the map. Our history has mostly been silenced and mundane. Farms surrounded us, a A coal mine was our major source of trade until that was exhausted in the early 20s, and other than routine, there's really not much else going on for us. However, I'm wanting to tell you all about the one thing that really caused a stir in the town a few decades ago, the ripples of which are still felt today. It's hardly going to be a tourist trap, quite the opposite if anything, but it's infinitely more interesting than farms and coal mines, even if for the wrong reasons. This is the Burning Man. There have been so many tales about him that have changed, evolved, and morphed over the years. Fitting as such is the nature of flames that it seemed as if people had outright forgotten whether it was factual or folklore. He somehow stemmed from individual strange occurrences and bloomed into our homegrown boogeyman. For what I've overheard, read, gathered, and remembered, the birth of the Burnt Man legend was down to a report from a woman who had been followed one night. This must have been late 80s, early 90s. Apparently the report was shrugged off because the woman was known for enhancing the truth, especially if she'd been at the one pub in town. Awful, I know, but it was a different time. But, not long after, more reports started flooding in. So many so that there had to be some iota of truth to it. Not only were more reputable women claiming they'd been followed, but the stories all had similar qualities. And this was before the Burnt Man was public knowledge. All at night, all walking alone, all said their stalker kept a safe distance, would just stop walking if they turned around, but maintained it until they turned a corner and fled. Everyone in the town knew each other, if not directly, at least via a friend or family member, so the fact that no one could quite put a finger on who the mysterious figure could be, it caused quite a stir. The embers of the story were fanned when, after a month or two of reports and no successful action, some of the women had managed to catch a glimpse of him, or so they claimed. From what I can recall, there was an anxious excitement that blazed from mind to mind, and everywhere from the post office to the school to the pub to the doctor's office, there was some version of the Burnt Man being told. The descriptions have been so varied over the years that it's difficult to discern whether the mundane or fantastical reports came first. They seemed to have been bandied about with such a fever that it became a form of entertainment more over warning. Some of what stuck with me are: most of the face burnt so that only tough scar tissue and pink, sun-dried flesh could be seen, which was quickly contradicted with, wears a mask and hat to cover his disfigurement. No eyebrows or eyelashes, no facial hair, completely bald. Though who would get so close to see? Others claimed, scalp scorched so severely that only tufts and clumps sprouted out sporadically and wildly, and even they were tinder dry and wisps at most. Some people said that he was burnt so bad that his flesh still glowed with the embers. Others said that in his eyes you could see the flames of hell flickering. Soon after, there came the idea that certain telltale signs could be spotted to let you know when he was around, even if you couldn't see him. If there was an inexplicable smell of sulfur, then he was lurking nearby. Your only cause of action would be to flee the scene and find someone to help. If you were walking and happened upon a pile of ash, it meant he'd been there a lot long ago. This one, apparently, had most evidence, but then was later debunked when a group of teens were cautioned by the police after they were caught leaving trails and mounds of ash outside the houses of widowed women. If you heard high-pitched laughter or squeaky voices conversing in a different language, they were his minions that scouted prime victims. My favorite one was, apparently, so long as you have a keen eye, you can work out his location in advance if you looked above the houses and spotted a thin trail of smoke. I used to be obsessed with the idea that no matter where I was, there could be a scream or a cry for help at any moment. Whether from a prank or an imagined sighting, I didn't care. It simply fascinated me. Maybe because the town was so boring, and this element of danger offered a remedy to the mundanity, but still. Though, after a while, the reports grew more worrying and took a sinister turn. People were no longer being followed, but attacked, and more. This substantiated a lot of fear that people were feeling, and I suppose it took the excitement away and replaced it with genuine danger, at least for a while. though it transpired that these reports always claimed the man was wearing a mask and a hat. They flooded in so fast and so widespread for the size of the town that it caused further panic, and then theories began to increase the velocity of the rumor mill. People began to wonder whether some of these attacks were from opportunists taking advantage of this feared assailant and dressing themselves to fit his fabled aesthetic, going out and paying heed to their urges of malcontent whilst having a ready-cooked scapegoat to take the blame. Some believe that there was an organized group, whether local or from afar. It was never made clear. Whisperings of a cult were entertained with this theory. Some outright went and decided that, with such a volume, the burnt man was in sooth a supernatural being, and he was employing some diabolical power to increase his activity. Soon after the attacks, the whole burnt man phenomena began edging towards its climax, when people began disappearing without a trace, and finally, when 4 bodies were found, bound and burned, in one of the stables about a mile out of town. A strict curfew was enforced for both men and women. Of course, the initial response to this was that the farmer was the burnt man all along, but that was quickly disproven when his own body was found, also burnt and bound. The town had been more tense than it ever had been, and the vigil held for the deceased was heartbreakingly sparse, seeing as most people didn't want to be caught outside if they didn't have to be. Effectively, the curfew reduced the reports, the attacks, and the fear, though there was still a few here and there, perhaps from desperate nobodies wanting to claim a semblance of relevance. I'm unsure. Even to this day, when people go missing, usually younger people or those who have been the subject of some trivial scandal or other, would still have the odd person believe it was the burnt man, rather than them escaping into an anonymity or relocating to a bigger city where opportunity was rife. When it all died down, that's when the aforementioned tales took full force. It was as if in the absence of imminent danger, people actually missed it. The stories either intended to keep people vigilant, or they had a sick intrigue, like me, into what awakened a sleeping town. It was the farmer's illegitimate son, was a strong claim. The man tried to burn him alive as a lad, so he ran away, grew up, and got revenge. A demon, another story that was the more spiritual and God-fearing championed. Born from flames and cast out of hell because he was too evil, even by their standards. A psychopath from the asylum in the next town over. This I found most chilling in its plausibility. That asylum was renowned and had a horrid history. An arsonist who burned his family in a fit of madness, and his only way to sate the agony was subjecting others to the same fate. Over the years, the burned man had found himself join the Halloween rostra. I've seen kids knock at doors in their little groups, some as witches, vampires, werewolves, and Frankenstein, and then one wearing a top hat with orange ribbons dangling down and a thin mask that covered most of the face. Any flesh left visible painted pink and raw. It also became a tradition in the town that on the day the bodies were found, people would take old clothes, fill them with hay, much like the Guy Fawkes tradition on bonfire night, and burn them. An offering to keep the demon, bastard, psycho at bay. It's actually surprisingly festive, and even the adults will join and dress up and share drinks. They love to watch the kids scream with feigned terror, watch the blooming fireworks color the night sky, and trade their favorite burnt man tale to friends who have heard them 1,000,000 times already. Or listen to the older generation who saw him once heading towards the forest, or introducing kids to the terror of their town. It's odd to feel proud of something so grim, isn't it? But if all you had for an attraction was an oddly shaped boulder excavated from the coal mine, perhaps you too would take pride in the insidious. I found the effect of the burnt man had affected people in different ways, especially when it comes to the annual burnings. It's as if the horror himself is famous, equally treasured, revered, and feared. The amount of women I've seen chatting to the men wearing more impressive costumes and giggling, chatting, even screaming with laughter as the man who would grab them around the waist and pretends their intention is to throw them on the pyre. I guess we all like that danger, because it reminds us that we're lucky to be alive. I must admit, too, I've taken advantage of dressing up, sharing drinks, and using the fable to win some attention from others. Most even love when I commit myself to the character completely. A roleplay of sorts. Though, I must say, my favorite thing about the tales, the legends, the horror, and sick excitement, is when I take off my mask. They all make the sheer look of terror on my next victim's face all the more potent.